The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel doesn't just circulate, it judges. It was an atmosphere thick with the scent of money, a mixture of Chanel No. 5 and ruthless ambition. For Audrina Rowe it was the smell of a life she had been brutally ejected from. She stood near a marble column, a ghost at the feast, watching her ex-husband Preston Vanderbilt III charm the city's elite. His new fiancée, a diamond-draped piranha named Bianca Dumont, spotted her and whispered to her friends. A wave of condescending smirks rippled through the crowd. They saw a forgotten woman, a social relic. What they didn't know was that in less than an hour, a dead man's final wish would detonate a bomb in the center of this gilded room, and Audrina Rowe was standing at ground zero. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, a stark slash of obsidian cardstock, amidst the usual junk mail and bills that constituted Audrina's new life. It was heavy, the kind of paper that felt like it was milled from money itself. The embossed silver lettering announced the annual Starlight Gala for the Arts, an event she knew all too well. It was the glittering jewel in the crown of New York's high society, a night of performative charity where fortunes were pledged and reputations were made or broken. Her first instinct was to burn it. The gala was Preston's world. It was the stage upon which he had paraded her for 5 years of their marriage, a tastefully dressed accessory to his burgeoning financial empire. Then it was the stage where he had soft-launched his affair with Bianca Dumont, letting the society photographers capture their accidental moments of intimacy while Audrina was at home naively believing he was working late. The divorce had been a quiet, brutalist affair. Preston's lawyers, a pack of polished sharks from Skadden Arps, had systematically dismantled her life, arguing that her contribution to the marriage was negligible. She, the quiet art history major who had supported him, proofread his presentations and hosted the dinner parties that cemented his crucial business deals, was painted as little more than a freeloader. She walked away with a settlement that was in their world insulting enough to buy a small studio apartment in Brooklyn and live modestly, but not enough to ever trouble their gilded stratosphere again. She was meant to disappear. So why the invitation? She scanned the card again. At the bottom, in small elegant script, it read, "Sponsored by the estate of Mr. Silas Whitaker." The name meant nothing to her. She assumed it was some new money titan trying to buy his way into the old guard. A guest list error, perhaps. Or worse, a deliberate act of cruelty from Preston or Bianca. A way to summon her to her own public execution to flaunt their victory in her face. For 3 days the card sat on her small kitchen counter, a dark promise. She spent those days in her studio, a converted corner of her living room that smelled perpetually of turpentine and linseed oil. Here she wasn't Preston's failed wife. She was a painter. Her canvases were her refuge, filled with haunting, ethereal landscapes that felt more real to her than the concrete city outside her window. She sold a few pieces online, enough to supplement her meager savings, but she was an artist in the truest sense. Unknown, unpaid, but utterly dedicated. It was while looking at her own reflection in a darkened window, a smudge of cobalt blue on her cheek, that she made her decision. Why was she hiding? She had done nothing wrong except love a man who was incapable of loving anything but his own reflection in the admiring eyes of others. She had survived him. She had rebuilt a life, a small and quiet one, but it was hers. Fear was a cage she had lived in for too long. Going to that gala wasn't about him, it was about her. It was about walking back into the fire and not flinching. She pulled a dress from the back of her closet, the only designer piece she had kept. It was a simple midnight blue silk gown by a lesser-known designer, elegant in its understatement. It was the dress she had worn on their last anniversary together, the night he had told her he felt they were growing in different directions. She had no diamonds to compete with Bianca, no fresh-off-the-runway couture. She would be armed with nothing but her own dignity. And as she stitched a small tear in the seam, she felt a strange, cold resolve settle over her. She wouldn't just attend, she would endure. The taxi dropped Audrina a block from the Pierre, unable to penetrate the phalanx of black town cars and Bentleys disgorging the city's power players. As she walked the final stretch, the crisp September air felt electric with privilege. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi created a strobing, disorienting wall of light, a modern-day gauntlet. She slipped past them, her name not famous enough to be called out, a mercy for which she was grateful. Stepping inside the grand ballroom was like stepping into another dimension. The scale of it was designed to diminish the individual, to awe one into submission. Chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped with Austrian crystal, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. A string quartet played Vivaldi, the sound a genteel veneer over the hum of cutthroat networking. Audrina felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. For a moment she was the 24-year-old newlywed, terrified of using the wrong fork, of mispronouncing a French name, of disappointing Preston. She took a deep breath, pushing the memory away. She was 32 now. She was a survivor. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a relatively quiet spot near a towering floral arrangement of white orchids and hydrangeas. From here she could observe. She saw the hedge fund kings and the real estate moguls, the tech billionaires in their deliberately casual attire, and their wives sculpted by personal trainers and surgeons into flawless effigies of wealth. It was a perfectly curated ecosystem of power, and she was an invasive species. It didn't take long for them to find her. "Well, well, look!" What the cat dragged in, a voice purred behind her. Audrina turned. Bianca Dumont stood there, a vision in crimson, a dress so bright it seemed to suck the light out of the room. A necklace of enormous diamonds, the famed Dumont rocks from her own family's collection, sat on her collarbones like a beautiful yoke. Flanking her were two other women, their faces tight with identical expressions of smug curiosity. Bianca, Audrina said, her voice even. "You look vibrant." Bianca's laugh was a tinkling, brittle sound. "And you look brave. I mean to come here after everything. And in that dress, is that vintage or just old?" The other women tittered. It was a classic Bianca attack, a smiling assassination. "It holds memories," Audrina replied, refusing to take the bait. "I'm sure it does," Bianca said, her eyes flicking over Audrina's form with dismissal. "Mostly of a life you no longer have access to, but I'm so glad you could make it. Preston will be thrilled to see you." As if summoned, Preston Vanderbilt III appeared at Bianca's side, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. He was as handsome as ever, his dark hair perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored to within an inch of its life. But his eyes, when they met Audrina's, held a flicker of something she recognized: annoyance. Her presence was an inconvenience, a loose thread on his perfectly woven tapestry of success. "Audrina," he said, the name sounding foreign in his mouth. "This is a surprise." "Preston?" She nodded. "I was invited." "An administrative error, surely," Bianca chimed in, squeezing his arm. "Darling, don't worry. I'm sure she's just here for the free champagne. She'll be gone before the auction starts." Preston gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. He looked at Audrina, and for a split second she saw the man she had married, the one who had once been embarrassed by his own parents' unpretentious middle-class life. He had spent his entire adulthood trying to outrun that shadow, and she was a living, breathing reminder of a time before he was a Vanderbilt in spirit as well as in name. "It's good to see you're—" Well, he managed the words, hollow and meaningless. He then turned his full attention back to Bianca, a king turning back to his queen, leaving Audrina in his wake. The message was clear. She wasn't just an ex-wife. She was a non-entity, a ghost. And as the trio moved away, their laughter trailing behind them, Audrina felt the eyes of the room on her. The whispers had started. The story of her social execution was now the evening's prime entertainment. She gripped her champagne flute, her knuckles white, and wondered if coming here had been the biggest mistake of her life. The next hour was a masterclass in social cruelty. It wasn't a singular dramatic event, but a slow, relentless erosion of her composure. People she had known for years, women she had hosted in her home, Men who had clapped Preston on the back at her dinner table now looked through her as if she were made of glass. A few offered tight, pitying smiles that were somehow worse than being ignored. The narrative orchestrated by Bianca was spreading through the ballroom like a virus. Poor Audrina Rowe can't let go trying to crash the party so desperate. She tried to find a corner to disappear into, but the room seemed to shrink around her. She found herself near the silent auction tables feigning interest in a signed first edition of a book she couldn't afford. I thought I smelled desperation mixed with the canapes. It was Jonathan Caldwell, a rival of Preston's in the cutthroat world of private equity. He was a man who enjoyed watching others fail almost as much as he enjoyed his own success. "Hello, Jonathan," Audrina said, not looking at him. "Bold move, Rowe, showing up here. You know Preston just closed the Axiom deal, a cool 9-figure profit. He's buying Bianca a little something from Graff as a celebration. I think he's upgrading, in every sense of the word." His leer was greasy and self-satisfied. Audrina felt a hot flush of anger and shame. She turned to walk away, but found her path blocked by another couple, the Ashworths, who had been their closest friends during the marriage. "Audrina, dear," said Mrs. Ashworth, her face a mask of faux concern. "We were so sorry to hear about, well, everything. But you're looking healthy. So wonderful that you're keeping your spirits up." The condescension was suffocating. Everywhere she turned it was the same. Whispers, stares, and the cold, hard judgment of a tribe ejecting one of its own. This was their power, not just the money, but the ability to enforce the invisible, brutal rules of their world. They could render a person invisible. The true nadir of the evening came just as the guests were being called to their tables for dinner. Audrina, deciding she had endured enough, was making her way toward the exit. She had proven her point to herself. She could face them. Now she just wanted the solace of her quiet apartment. As she passed the central bar, Bianca intercepted her, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand. Leaving so soon, she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "But the night is just getting started. You can't miss the speeches. Preston is being honored, you know, for his philanthropy." "I've seen enough," Audrina said, her voice low. "Oh, I don't think so," Bianca said. And then, with a theatrical little stumble that fooled no one, she lurched forward, sloshing the entire contents of her glass down the front of Audrina's midnight blue dress. The cold liquid soaked through the silk, instantly shocking and sticky. A collective gasp went through the immediate crowd. "Oh, my heavens!" Bianca cried, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I am so clumsy. Look what I've done. To your lovely little dress. It's completely ruined." People were staring openly now, phones subtly angled to capture the drama. Preston rushed over, his face a thunderous mask of controlled fury at Audrina for being the source of this public spectacle. "Bianca, darling, are you all right?" he asked, completely ignoring the champagne-soaked Audrina. "I'm fine. I just feel terrible," Bianca said, dabbing at Audrina's dress with a flimsy cocktail napkin, succeeding only in smearing the stain. "This must be devastating for you. I know how much things must mean to you now." The insult was multifaceted and brilliant in its cruelty. It referenced Audrina's dress, her financial status, and her emotional state all at once. It was a perfect public humiliation. Audrina stood frozen, the damp fabric clinging to her skin, the scent of champagne filling her nostrils. The stares of the crowd felt like physical blows. She looked at Preston, hoping for a flicker of decency, a shred of the man she once loved. She found nothing. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated annoyance. She was a stain on his perfect evening. That was it, the final straw. The cold resolve she had felt earlier shattered, replaced by a raw, searing pain. They had won. She turned without a word and began to walk towards the exit, her head down, the sound of Bianca's false apologies and the crowd's muffled whispers chasing her like a pack of hounds. She just wanted to disappear, to run back to her quiet life and never ever look back. But she didn't make it to the door. because at that moment the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, the string quartet fell silent, and a single authoritative voice boomed from the stage's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" A special announcement from the estate of our evening's host, Mr. Silas Whitaker. The sudden change in atmosphere was palpable. The gossiping clusters fell silent, their attention reluctantly pulled from the minor drama of Audrina's humiliation to the main stage. A spotlight cut through the dimness, illuminating a man standing at the podium. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and a face that spoke of quiet authority. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks in the audience. "Good evening," the man said, his voice calm and measured, carrying to every corner of the vast room. "My name is Alistair Beaumont. I am the executor of the estate of the late Silas Whitaker." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas Whitaker was a name whispered with a mixture of awe and mystery. He was a genuine recluse, a phantom of the financial world. He'd built a vast labyrinthine empire spanning technology shipping and rare earth minerals, yet there were fewer than a dozen known photographs of him. He gave no interviews, attended no parties, and lived a life of monastic seclusion. His death a month prior had sparked a frenzy of speculation. Who would inherit his legendary, almost mythical fortune? He had no known children, no living relatives. Audrina had stopped in her tracks halfway to the exit. She stood in the shadows, the damp cold patch on her dress a chilling reminder of her shame. She should leave. This had nothing to do with her. But something in Mr. Beaumont's dignified presence held her rooted to the spot. Mr. Whitaker was a man of particular principles. Beaumont continued, his eyes scanning the room of billionaires and socialites. There was no deference in his gaze. If anything, there was a hint of disdain. He believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege, a tool, not a trophy. He was the sole benefactor of this gala tonight, and in his final directives he insisted I use this occasion to make an announcement concerning the final disposition of his entire estate. The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the clinking of ice and glasses had ceased. This was unheard of. The reading of a will was a private legal matter, not a piece of theater at a charity gala. Preston and Bianca, now seated at their prime table near the stage, were leaning forward, their expressions rapt. A fortune of that magnitude, estimated to be in the tens of billions, could reshape the power dynamics of their entire world. Everyone in that room was mentally calculating, speculating. Was it a foundation? A university? A dark horse corporate heir? For the past 30 years, Beaumont said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in closer. Mr. Whitaker engaged in a quiet search. He was not looking for a successor in business, nor was he looking for a long-lost relative. He was, in his own words, searching for a person of unimpeachable character, an heir not of blood but of spirit. The concept was so alien, so antithetical to the dynastic, bloodline-obsessed culture of the people in that room, that it was met with a wave of confused murmurs. He believed that true character is revealed not in the spotlight of success, but in the shadows of adversity. Beaumont went on, his gaze sweeping across the room, and for a fleeting, unnerving moment Audrina felt as if his eyes met hers. He sought someone who valued integrity over influence, kindness over currency, and authenticity over applause. He spent years observing quietly from a distance, searching for this one individual. Audrina's heart began to beat a little faster, a strange premonition taking root in her chest. It was absurd, a fantasy. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the trajectory of the evening of her entire life was about to pivot on this man's next words. He found this person not in a boardroom, not at a country club, and not in the society pages. Beaumont said, his voice building to a crescendo. He found them in a small, unassuming corner of the world, living a life of quiet dignity and creating beauty against a backdrop of personal hardship. On the stage, Beaumont adjusted his glasses and picked up a single sheet of paper from the podium. It was a simple typed page, not the ostentatious vellum-bound document one might expect. In accordance with the last will and testament of Silas Aloysius Whitaker, executed on the 5th of August this year, I am legally bound and honored to announce the sole heir to his entire fortune, the controlling interest in Whitaker Global Industries, and the stewardship of his philanthropic foundation. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Every eye in the grand ballroom was locked on him. The air was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. The sole heir to the Whitaker estate is a resident of Brooklyn, a local artist. He took one final dramatic breath. Her name is Ms. Audrina Rowe. For one long silent second the name just hung in the air, seemingly disconnected from anything real. Audrina Rowe. It was a name that meant nothing to these people. A clerical error, perhaps. A joke. Then a collective subconscious memory seemed to ripple through the crowd. They turned one by one, their gazes sweeping the room, searching. Their eyes passed over the woman in the shadows, the one with the champagne-stained dress. They looked, and then they looked again. Their brains struggled to connect the two images, the mocked, pathetic ex-wife cowering by the exit and the name that had just been tied to one of the largest fortunes on the planet. The first sound was a champagne flute slipping from someone's fingers and shattering on the polished floor. It was the starting pistol for chaos. A disbelieving gasp erupted from Bianca Dumont. Her perfectly made-up face, moments before a mask of smug triumph, had contorted into a grotesque tableau of shock and incandescent rage. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Preston Vanderbilt III simply froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a waxy pale gray. His eyes, wide with utter disbelief, were locked on Audrina. He looked as though the floor had vanished from beneath his feet, plunging him into an abyss. The Axiom deal, the Graf necklace, his entire carefully constructed world, it all seemed to shrink into pathetic insignificance in the face of this incomprehensible reality. Audrina felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her mind was a roaring white noise of confusion. Silas Whitaker, an artist. Me. It made no sense. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by the stress and humiliation of the evening. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, but they were different now. The pity and scorn were gone, replaced by a potent cocktail of shock, awe, and raw, naked envy. Mr. Beaumont on stage seemed oblivious to the pandemonium he had unleashed. He simply folded the paper, placed it in his breast pocket, and said, "My associates will be cordoning off the west exit for Ms. Rowe. Thank you for your time." The spell broke. The press, who had been confined to a roped-off area, surged forward, their cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. Shouts echoed through the ballroom. Ms. Rowe, over here." "Audrina, how did you know him?" "What are you going to do with the money?" Men in dark suits, presumably. Beaumont's security materialized around her, forming a protective barrier. One of them spoke into his wrist. "Package is secure. Moving to extraction point." From across the room, Preston finally snapped out of his trance. He stumbled from his chair, pushing people aside, his face a desperate pleading mask. "Audrina," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Audrina, wait! We need to talk." Bianca grabbed his arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his jacket. "Preston, what are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice shrill with hysteria. "Don't you dare go to her!" But Preston shook her off, his eyes fixed on Audrina with a desperate intensity she had never seen before. He was looking at her, really looking at her for the first time in years. But he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing Whitaker Global Industries. He was seeing a seat at a table so high and mighty it made his own look like a child's stool. Audrina just stared at him, her mind slowly beginning to process the tectonic shift that had just occurred. The man who had allowed her to be humiliated, who had watched bored as his fiancée symbolically spat on her, was now fighting his way through a crowd to get to her. The irony was so profound it was almost sickening. One of the security guards gently touched her arm. "Ms. Rowe." "This way, please." She allowed herself to be guided through the throng of stunned, gawking faces. She saw the Ashworths, their jaws agape. She saw Jonathan Caldwell, his smug leer replaced by a look of slack-jawed astonishment. They were all looking at her as if she were a celestial event, a solar eclipse they couldn't possibly comprehend. As she was whisked through the west exit and into a quiet marble-lined corridor, she took one last look back into the grand ballroom. It was a scene of utter chaos, a world turned upside down. The rigid, unforgiving hierarchy of this universe had been shattered by a dead man's words, and in its place a new bewildering order was being born. And she, Audrina Rowe, the ghost at the feast, was now sitting on the throne. The town car that spirited her away from the Pierre was an island of silent leather-scented calm in a sea of pandemonium. Audrina stared out the tinted window at the flashing lights and scrum of reporters now surrounding the hotel entrance, her mind still struggling to catch up with reality. Beside her, Alistair Beaumont sat patiently, not speaking, giving her the space to breathe. Finally she turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand." "Silas Whittaker. I don't know anyone by that name. This has to be a mistake." Beaumont offered a small, kind smile. "It's no mistake, Ms. Rowe. But I understand your confusion. You didn't know him as Silas Whittaker. You knew him as Mr. Silas." The name sent a jolt through her. Mr. Silas. An old man, stooped and gentle, who was a fixture at the small park near her Brooklyn apartment. He was there almost every afternoon, sitting on the same bench feeding pigeons from a paper bag and reading worn paperback novels. She had struck up a conversation with him one day, about a year ago after her divorce, when the loneliness had felt particularly sharp. He'd told her he was a retired history teacher. His clothes were simple, a bit frayed. His hands were gnarled with what she assumed was arthritis. He was quiet, a wonderful listener, and he had the kindest, most observant eyes she had ever seen. They talked about books, about the changing seasons, about the struggles of life in the city. She found herself confiding in him, telling him about her art, her failed marriage, her fears, and her dreams. He never offered advice, but he always listened with a profound, validating attention that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The old man. From the park, she stammered, her mind reeling. The retired teacher. He was many things, Ms. Rowe, but he was never a teacher. Beaumont confirmed gently. That was his escape. His way of being a person, not a portfolio. He was one of the wealthiest men in the world, but he was also one of the loneliest. You showed him a kindness that was entirely without agenda. You spoke to him not because you wanted something, but because you saw a fellow human being on a park bench. Tears welled in Audrina's eyes as the pieces clicked into place. She remembered showing him photos of her paintings on her phone. He'd studied them with an intense focus. "You capture the soul of things, my dear," he'd said, his voice raspy. "Never let anyone tell you this isn't important." After your first few conversations, Beaumont continued, he tasked me with learning everything I could about you. We discovered the circumstances of your divorce, your financial struggles. Silas was impressed by your resilience, but he was most interested in your art. He began buying your paintings anonymously through an online gallery under a corporate pseudonym. He paid far above your asking price. The larger sales you made over the past year, they were all to him. He owned 17 of your canvases. He called them his windows to integrity. Audrina thought of the unexpected sales that had kept her afloat, the ones that had given her the hope to keep painting. It had been him all along. He had been her silent patron, her secret guardian angel. The car pulled into the private garage of a towering skyscraper on Park Avenue. This was Mr. Whittaker's primary residence, Beaumont explained as they rode a private elevator that opened directly into a breathtaking penthouse apartment. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. But it wasn't ostentatious. It was filled with books, her art, and comfortable, well-worn furniture. On a simple oak table in the center of the room was a single sealed envelope with her name on it. His final letter to you, Beaumont said, the rest. Well, we have much to discuss. Whitaker Global is a complex machine. It encompasses shipping lines, tech firms, real estate holdings across 3 continents. The foundation has an endowment larger than the GDP of several countries. It's all yours to command now, Ms. Rowe. It is a staggering inheritance, but as Silas saw it, it is also a staggering responsibility. Audrina walked through the silent apartment, her fingers tracing the frame of one of her own paintings hanging on the wall. She looked down at the city lights twinkling below the same lights that had seemed so cold and indifferent just hours ago. She thought of Preston desperately clawing his way up this very ladder, only to have her, the woman he had discarded, dropped onto the very summit from an unimaginable height. This wasn't just money. It was power. It was a legacy. It was the final profound act of a quiet man on a park bench who had seen her at her lowest and decided to hand her the world. She picked up the letter, her hands trembling. Her old life was over. It had ended the moment Alistair Beaumont had spoken her name. A new, terrifying, and extraordinary life was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of lawyers, accountants, and board members. Audrina was immersed in a crash course on an empire she never knew existed. She learned about satellite networks, cobalt mines in the Congo, and biotech startups in Silicon Valley. It was overwhelming, a deluge of information that threatened to drown her. But through it all, she clung to the memory of Mr. Silas on his park bench and the words in his letter. "My dear Audrina." It began his handwriting, a surprisingly elegant script. "If you are reading this, then my search is over, and my faith in you has been validated. Do not be intimidated by the scale of what I leave you. These are all just tools. I have spent a lifetime accumulating them, but I lack the vision and the heart to wield them for a greater good. You have that heart. You see the beauty and the pain in the world and capture it on canvas. Now the world is your canvas. Don't try to be me. Be you. Remake this empire in your image. Support the artists, help the voiceless build things of beauty and tear down walls of arrogance. The jackals will circle. They will smell money and weakness. Do not let them see you as weak. Your kindness is not a weakness. It is your sharpest weapon. Be brave." His words became her mantra. She started making decisions, small at first, then larger. She diverted a fraction of the foundation's annual budget, a sum still in the hundreds of millions, to create the largest arts grant in the world for struggling unknown artists. She instructed the board of Whitaker Global to begin a review of their Congolese mining operations, with a new mandate prioritizing worker safety and environmental impact over quarterly profits, causing a minor panic on Wall Street. She was no longer the timid woman from the Gala. Power, she was discovering, was a suit of armor. The world no longer looked through her. It watched her every move with bated breath. About a week after the announcement, her assistant, a concept she was still getting used to, informed her that a Mr. Preston Vanderbilt III was in the lobby, begging for 5 minutes of her time. Curiosity piqued, she agreed to see him. She received him not in a formal office, but in the main living area of the penthouse, where one of her largest paintings, a landscape of a storm gathering over a calm sea, now hung. Preston entered, and the change in him was startling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, cloying humility. He was holding a bouquet of roses that looked absurdly small in the vast room. "Audrina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you look incredible. I always knew you had this in you." Audrina simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You have 5 minutes, Preston." He faltered, then launched into a pathetic, pre-rehearsed speech. "I was a fool, Audrina, a blind, arrogant fool. I was so caught up in that world, the pressure, the expectations. I lost sight of what was important. I lost you. Seeing you that night, even before the announcement, I realized the mistake I had made. Bianca and I, we're finished. It was always you." He took a step closer. "We were good together. We can be again. Think of what we could do, you and I, your vision, my experience. We could be the ultimate power couple." Audrina listened to his words, and she felt nothing. No anger, no pain, not even pity. It was like listening to a broadcast from a distant, irrelevant planet. He hadn't changed. He was just a chameleon changing his colors to match the most powerful thing in the room. Before it was Bianca's family money. Now it was her. When he was finished, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but laced with steel. "You're right about one thing, Preston. You were a fool, but not because you lost me. You were a fool because you never saw me in the first place. You saw a prop, a reflection, a stepping stone. That night at the gala, you and Bianca, you gave me a gift. You showed me with perfect clarity exactly what my life is not and who I am not." She walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Your 5 minutes are up. Please see yourself out. And tell your friends the Ashworths and the Caldwells and the rest of them not to bother calling. My world is not for sale and access to it cannot be bought." He stood there, stunned into silence, the roses dangling from his hand. He had come expecting to negotiate, to manipulate, to find a way back in. He was confronted with a closed door, a woman who no longer needed anything from him, not even an apology. After he was gone, Audrina stayed by the window for a long time. The city sprawled before her, a kingdom of glass and steel. It had been the site of her greatest humiliation and her most unbelievable triumph. She was no longer Audrina Rowe, the failed wife. She was not yet the titan of industry the world expected her to be. She was something new, something she was building herself. One brushstroke, one decision at a time, and for the first time in her life, she was utterly, completely, and magnificently free. 6 months after the gala, the name Audrina Rowe meant something entirely different to the world. The initial media frenzy had subsided, replaced by a cautious, fascinated observation. The narrative of the Cinderella artist had proven too simplistic. Audrina was not a damsel in a tower overwhelmed by her fortune. She was an architect already redesigning the tower from the inside out. Her office on the 80th floor of the Whitaker Global building was her first statement. She had stripped away the heavy mahogany and dark leather of Silas Whitaker's era, replacing it with light oak clean lines and vast open spaces. The walls were a gallery of works by the inaugural recipients of her Momentum Arts Grant, bold, challenging pieces from artists who a year ago had been struggling in obscurity. It was less a corporate headquarters and more the world's highest art studio, a place where creativity and commerce were forced to coexist. Audrina herself had changed. The diffidence was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable authority. She moved with purpose. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the immense weight of her new position. She hadn't adopted the severe power suits of her female counterparts. Instead, she favored elegantly tailored dresses in deep colors. Her only jewelry, a simple silver bracelet, a gift from Mr. Silas left for her in his desk that she had discovered weeks after his death. The changes she implemented sent ripples through every corner of the empire. The ethical reforms in the Congo, initially derided as Audrina's folly by Wall Street analysts, had unexpectedly quelled a long-simmering labor dispute that had threatened to halt production for months. Her investment in a risky but revolutionary green energy startup, an act seen as sentimental, was now being hailed as visionary after the company secured a game-changing patent. She was running the company, not like a machine, but like a living ecosystem, understanding that the health of the whole depended on the well-being of its smallest parts. The old world, Preston's world, didn't know what to make of her. Invitations to every charity board and exclusive event flooded her office. They were desperate for the legitimacy and power her name now conferred. She ignored them all, choosing instead to make unannounced visits to the art schools and community centers her foundation now supported. But an empire, she was learning, is not a static object to be reshaped at will. It is a territory, and there are always others who covet it. Alistair Beaumont had warned her about Lachlan Kane. Kane was a corporate predator of the old school, a man who saw companies not as entities to be nurtured, but as carcasses to be stripped for parts. He had been circling Whitaker Global for years, waiting for the old man to die, believing the company would be left in a state of chaos ripe for a hostile takeover. Audrina's appointment had been a shocking, infuriating obstacle to his ambitions. And Lachlan Kane did not suffer obstacles gladly. He requested a meeting and Audrina granted it, holding it in her office. When he walked in, he was exactly as Beaumont had described, impeccably dressed with a predator's smile and eyes that appraised everything for its monetary value. "Ms. Rowe," he began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr, as he took in the art on her walls. "An eclectic decorator. I trust you're enjoying your new role." "It's fulfilling, Mr. Kane," Audrina replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What can I do for you?" "Let's be direct," he said, leaning forward, his smile tightening. "You are an artist, a person of sentiment. I am a businessman. This world," he gestured around the vast office, "is not your world. It's a brutal, unforgiving game. You are in over your head." He laid out his proposal. It was a buyout skillfully packaged as a rescue mission. He would take the burden of Whitaker Global off her delicate shoulders, leaving her with a generous cash settlement and full control of the philanthropic foundation. "You can focus on your art on giving money away," he said patronizingly. "Leave the difficult business of making it to people like me." Audrina listened without interruption, her hands resting calmly on the table. She let him talk for 10 full minutes, letting him lay all his assumptions, all his contempt on the table. He saw her as a naive girl who had won the lottery, someone who would be easily intimidated. When he finally finished, a smug, expectant look on his face, she offered him a serene smile. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You're right. I am an artist. And as an artist, I've learned a few things. I've learned how to see the true color of a thing even when it's hidden under layers of varnish. I've learned that a structure with a rotten foundation will eventually collapse no matter how beautiful the facade. And I've learned the value of a blank canvas." She leaned forward, her smile fading, replaced by an intensity that made him blink. "I have read the file on you. All of them. I read about your takeover of Omnicorp in 2018 and how you stripped it of its assets, fired 3,000 employees, and walked away with $1 billion, leaving a dead company and a ruined town in your wake. I also read about your failed attempt to acquire Titan Industries and how you were outmaneuvered because you underestimated their new CEO, believing her to be too sentimental because she invested in research and development." Lachlan Kane's face had lost its color. "This is business," he hissed. "No," Audrina corrected him. "That was your art form, vandalism on a corporate scale. But you will not be vandalizing this canvas." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I rejected your offer before you even walked in this room. In fact, I have a counter-proposal." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was the press release set to go public in 30 minutes. "The Whitaker Foundation," Audrina said coolly, "has just completed the acquisition of a 51% controlling stake in Argentus Logistics. As I'm sure you know, Argentus holds the exclusive transport contracts for nearly all the raw materials your own businesses rely on. They were struggling much like Omnicorp was. But instead of stripping it, we're going to invest. We're going to rebuild it. And we are going to honor all existing contracts. Under a revised pricing model, of course. One that reflects a more ethical partnership." Lachlan Kane stared at the screen, then at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. She had not only blocked him, she had flanked him. Using her foundation, her sentimental wing, she had executed a move of surgical corporate precision, seizing control of his most critical vulnerability. He stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "You have no idea what you've just done," he snarled. "I think I do," Audrina said, her voice unwavering. "I'm protecting my inheritance. Mr. Whitaker didn't just leave me a fortune, Mr. Kane. He left me a fight. And I'm discovering I have a talent for it." After he stormed out, Audrina walked to the window. The fight was far from over. She knew she had made a powerful and ruthless enemy, but she felt no fear, only a quiet, thrilling sense of purpose. She looked down at the city not as a collection of buildings, but as a dynamic interplay of light and shadow. It was a complex composition, and she was no longer just observing it. She was learning how to paint. The weeks following Lachlan Kane's retreat were not quiet. He was a wounded predator, and he chose to fight not in the boardroom, but in the court of public opinion. A coordinated smear campaign materialized in the financial press. Anonymous sources quoted in columns by journalists known for their attack dog style painted Audrina as dangerously naive. The artist in the ivory tower. One headline blared. Is Audrina Rowe trading billions in shareholder value for woke ideology? Another asked. They called her acquisition of Argentus Logistics a reckless act of personal vengeance, a foolish gamble that put the entire Whitaker empire at risk. The campaign had its intended effect. The Whitaker global stock, which had been stable, began to dip as nervous investors reacted to the narrative of an inexperienced emotional woman at the helm. This external pressure created fractures within the company itself. The board, composed mostly of men who had served under Silas for decades, grew restless. They had respected Silas's eccentricities because he had a 40-year track record of ruthless success. Audrina had a 6-month track record of philanthropy and one audacious corporate maneuver. The dissent was given a voice by Walter Jennings, a board member of 30 years and a staunch traditionalist. In an emergency meeting, he formally challenged her leadership. Silas left you in charge to be a steward, Ms. Rowe, not a revolutionary. He'd said, his tone heavy with condescension. This move against Kane was personal, not strategic. You've rattled the markets and made us look unstable. We need to divest from Argentus and reassure our shareholders. Audrina looked around the polished boardroom table at the anxious, skeptical faces. The old Audrina would have shrunk under their collective disapproval. The old Audrina would have questioned herself, her instincts. But that woman was gone. Instead of retreating, she decided to walk directly into the fire. She agreed to her first public interview not with a friendly lifestyle magazine, but with Nina Sharma, the host of CNBC's The Crucible, a journalist renowned for her sharp intellect and for making powerful CEOs squirm. When she walked onto the television set, she felt a sea of eyes on her, just like at the Gala. But this time she was not the subject of pity. She was the subject of intense, critical scrutiny. Nina Sharma began with a direct salvo. Ms. Rowe, Wall Street is in an uproar. Lachlan Kane's camp accuses you of using Whitaker Global as a personal weapon. Your own board has expressed concerns. Are you sacrificing profits for a personal vendetta? Audrina met the journalist's gaze, her calm a stark contrast to the high-stakes atmosphere. Thank you for having me, Nina. What Mr. Kane's camp calls a personal weapon, I call a strategic defense. Mr. Whitaker built an empire, but he didn't build a fortress. It was vulnerable to predators like Mr. Kane, who see great companies as nothing more than assets to be stripped and sold. My acquisition of Argentus Logistics wasn't an attack. It was the construction of a necessary wall. It ensures the stability of our supply chains and insulates us from the kind of corporate vandalism Mr. Kane is famous for. Nina Sharma was unfazed. A very expensive wall. Critics say this is the action of an activist, not a CEO. They say you don't have the experience to be running a company this complex. I'm not a traditional CEO. Audrina conceded, a move that surprised the anchor. My background isn't in finance. It's in art history and creation. But art teaches you to see the world differently. An artist learns to value the foundation of a sculpture, not just its surface gloss. We learn that a masterpiece is not created overnight. It requires patience, long-term vision, and an unwavering commitment to quality. I am not interested in the short-term gloss of quarterly earnings at the expense of the long-term health of this company. I am building a masterpiece, not flipping a property. And that is a vision I believe our serious investors will come to appreciate. She spoke with a quiet, compelling passion, her language clear and free of corporate jargon. She dismantled every criticism, not with defensiveness, but with a confident alternative philosophy. When Sharma asked about her ethical reforms, she didn't talk about charity. She talked about risk management. A happy, safe workforce is a productive workforce. A clean environmental record avoids future fines and reputational damage. Kindness isn't a cost, Nina. In the 21st century, it is one of the most valuable assets a company can have. The interview was a revelation. It went viral with clips replayed across every platform. The narrative began to shift. She wasn't an emotional amateur. She was a new kind of visionary. A younger generation of investors tired of the old slash-and-burn model of corporate growth were inspired. The Whitaker Global stock stabilized, then began a steady, confident climb, reaching a higher point than before the dip. At the next board meeting, the atmosphere was entirely different. Walter Jennings sat in stony silence as Audrina, backed by Alistair Beaumont, presented a meticulously detailed 5-year plan. It was her artistic vision translated into the language of data charts, projections, and market analysis that demonstrated how her ethical and strategic initiatives would lead to sustainable long-term growth. She didn't ask for their faith. She earned their respect with sheer competence. The challenge to her leadership evaporated. Days later, Audrina slipped away from her skyscraper office and drove to a newly opened community arts center in the Bronx funded by her foundation. No cameras, no assistants. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back. She spent the afternoon at a pottery wheel, her hands caked in wet gray clay. The young artists around her knew she was their benefactor, but in this space, she was just Audrina, another creator. A teenage girl, her face smudged with clay, worked intently beside her. "I just want to make something," the girl said, her eyes bright with passion. "Something real, something that will last." Audrina looked down at her own hands, shaping the raw, formless material into the beginnings of a bowl. The feeling of creation, of bringing something new and whole into the world from nothing, was the same feeling she now had sitting at the head of the boardroom table. She was no longer just the keeper of a dead man's legacy. She was a sculptor working with a much larger, more complex kind of clay, shaping a legacy of her own. And it was just beginning to take form. Audrina's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who discard us. She walked into that gala as a ghost, a footnote in her ex-husband's triumphant life, and walked out a queen. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the vindication. It was the universe affirming that her quiet strength, her hidden talent, and her resilient heart were more valuable than all the shallow glamour in that ballroom. Her journey from a humble Brooklyn artist to a global powerhouse proves that the greatest comebacks are forged in the fires of humiliation, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power. What would you do if you were handed that kind of power overnight? Do you believe in karma, that people eventually get what they deserve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you and you want to hear more incredible real-life dramas, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening.
What happens when the perfect life is built on a perfect lie? For 7 months, Catherine Vance Thorne believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-million-dollar empire at their fingertips, and their first child on the way. She pictured a future filled with laughter in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But her husband, the charismatic Marcus Thorne, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Catherine on a desperate drive to a secluded Hamptons resort, the masterpiece of deceit Marcus has been crafting is about to be slashed to ribbons. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power isn't in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above Central Park, New York City, looked like a schematic, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Catherine Vance Thorne rested a hand on the gentle, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the life within her. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both profoundly powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The nursery was complete, a serene masterpiece of cream and gentle grey, with a handcrafted mobile of celestial bodies waiting to spin above a crib that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was curated for perfection, a testament to the combined might of the Vance and Thorne dynasties. Her family, the Vances, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unshakable force in the city's financial landscape. Marcus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, daring wunderkind, the man who could scent a market shift like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the society event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Catherine traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She looked at her husband, who stood with his back to her phone, pressed to his ear. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted by success. His Savile Row suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame, and his voice, even muffled, was a low, confident baritone that could soothe panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future. Or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone sharp. "The timeline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned a practiced smile, instantly softening the hard lines of his face. "Sorry about that, my love. Incompetence is the one market I can't seem to short." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world doing?" "We're good." Catherine smiled the familiar warmth of his touch, chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been active today. I think he's going to be a soccer player. Or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey and something else she couldn't quite name. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne Creed Aventus, nor was it her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy, a woman's scent. She dismissed it. He'd been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen." He began settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something's come up. A big something. You know the tech merger I've been working on? The one in San Francisco?" Catherine nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, the key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it, but I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days, 3 at the most. It's the final push, Kat. This deal will secure our child's future 10 times over." A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. "Tonight? But Marcus, my checkup is tomorrow. The big one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again." His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. "I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I would rather be here holding your hand than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical. The timing is everything. He stroked her cheek. I'll be back before you know it, and I promise I will not miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Moustique after the baby comes. Just the three of us. The promise of a future luxury was a common balm he applied to present disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Marcus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. I understand. It's for us. Exactly, he said, relief washing over his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. I'll go pack. My flight is in 3 hours. As he walked towards their master suite, Catherine's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt was peeking out from the side pocket. Normally, she would never have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint alien scent of perfume, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of curiosity. Her heart thumping with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled the receipt free. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perle, the lingerie boutique. The date was from that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, an eyelash lace bra, a matching thong. Size small. Catherine was a medium, and with her pregnancy she had been living in comfortable, soft cotton. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones. There could be an explanation. A gift for a friend's wife. A present for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have given it to her with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands trembling. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She was being paranoid. The stress of the pregnancy was making her imagine things. Marcus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling a sleek Rimowa carry-on. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable but stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked every bit the global executive on the move. All set, he announced, his voice breezy. The car is waiting downstairs. Now I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go with you to the doctor, right? Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Marcus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Catherine had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotection. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. Good, Marcus said. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. I'll call you the moment I land. I love you more than anything. I love you too, she managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black town car, a tiny, insignificant figure 60 floors below. The car didn't turn east towards JFK or LaGuardia. It headed west towards the West Side Highway, towards the Hamptons. The cold dread solidified into a terrifying certainty. The San Francisco Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her, and her husband was not on a business trip. He was on his way to a rendezvous. Alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the Hewland trapping of their perfect life, Catherine Vance Thorne finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break. She was not just a wife. She was a Vance, and the Vances did not crumble. They fought back. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her from her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The silence in the penthouse after Marcus left was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum from the climate control system seemed to mock Catherine's newfound solitude. She walked through the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life, the polished mahogany of the dining table where they'd hosted glittering dinner parties, the soft leather of the armchair where he read the Wall Street Journal every morning. It all felt like a movie set the backdrop for a story she had mistakenly believed was her own. She sank onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perla receipt burning a hole in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced sifting through the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had glossed over. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed the weekends he'd spent at the office, but came home looking relaxed, not tired. The password on his personal laptop, which had always been her birthday, was suddenly changed. At the time, she had chalked it up to his company's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it seemed like a locked door she had never thought to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Catherine's posture. Beatrice Vance was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Catherine was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was blunt and fiery, her loyalty fierce and her bullshit detector flawless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, foregoing a hello as she dropped her purse onto a chair. Did the Prince of Wall Street forget to kiss his pregnant princess goodbye? Catherine's composure, so carefully maintained, overnight crumbled. She handed her sister the receipt. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. Size small. Beatrice said flatly, "Well, that's not for you, is it? Not unless he's planning for 2 years from now. The man is many things, but a forward planner in lingerie is not one of them." She looked up at Catherine, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Kath." What did he say? Through tears she could no longer suppress. Catherine recounted the story, the sudden trip, the San Francisco excuse, the car heading west. The Hamptons, Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course, it's off-season, quiet, exclusive, the perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Marcus has a corporate account at the Seagate. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff is trained to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Catherine's blood ran cold. The Seagate. Marcus had taken her there for their first anniversary. It was secluded, nestled in a private cove, a haven of understated luxury. The memory was now tainted, corrupted. "I have to know, Bea." Catherine said, her voice gaining a steely edge that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but beneath it, a new resolve was hardening. This was the Vance bloodline, kicking in the same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure?" Beatrice asked gently. "You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock." "What's more stressful?" Catherine countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "The agonizing uncertainty, or the cold, hard truth. This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deceit. I need to know what I'm fighting." Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "All right, then let's go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysterics. We gather irrefutable proof. We need more than a receipt for some slutty underwear." The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Catherine had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a reassurance, a tiny drumbeat of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, if light travel was permissible. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Miller said warmly. "A short car ride, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't overexert yourself." It was the clearance she needed. The next step was intel. While Catherine was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Catherine returned to the car, Beatrice was tapping furiously on her phone. "Okay. I think I have something," she said, her voice low and excited. "My friend Jessica owes me one." She pulled some strings. "She can't access the Seagate's official guest list, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a booking was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couple's deep tissue massage, booked under the name Mr. Thorne. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." The words Mrs. Thorne felt like a physical blow. He was not just with another woman. He was giving her Catherine's title, her identity, in this secret, sordid world he had created. "The appointment is at 4 p.m. Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. "That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path forward that felt real. Catherine called the family's trusted driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with the Vances for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to the Hamptons. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by the manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the Long Island Expressway. Catherine sat in the plush leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of past memories and future fears. She remembered Marcus proposing to her on a wind-swept cliff in Big Sur, telling her that his life had been black and white until she brought the color. Had that been a lie, too? Was he a sociopath, a brilliant actor playing the part of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. "Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We need to be smart. You are Catherine Vance Thorne. You have every right to be there. We'll go to the front desk. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You'll be charming, poised. They know the Vance name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. The Oceanfront Villa 7. That's where he is." Beatrice had managed to get the villa number from her source. Villa 7, the most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace that overlooked the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. Then we wait, Beatrice said firmly. We sit in the lobby. We order tea, and we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut says they'll be back in the room. People like that, they want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for. As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to the Hamptons, Catherine felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own fate. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The unraveling thread had led her here to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull it until the entire tapestry of lies came undone. The Seagate Resort and Spa was designed to look like it had been carved from the very dunes it occupied. Weathered grey cedar, vast expanses of glass and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic, wildly expensive tranquility. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult. Frank pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the portico. A valet young and crisp in his uniform rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Catherine's hand a final firm squeeze. Showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it. Catherine stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She was the very picture of refined elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest raging within her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic desk of reclaimed wood. Catherine glided towards the desk, Beatrice, a half step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Marcus Thorne. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Anja, offered a polite professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. It's a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Catherine produced her driver's license. Anja's eyes flickered from the ID to Catherine's face, then to the name Thorne. The recognition was instant. Marcus Thorne was a name that commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Anya said, her smile warming slightly. "Mr. Thorne is checked into Villa 7. I must say it's a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for some intense solitary work. The lie repeated by a stranger was like a fresh stab wound." Solitary work. Catherine's smile didn't waver. "He works far too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I'd like to be waiting for him when he returns." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the primary guest present was a breach of protocol even for a spouse. Anya hesitated, her professional training warring with the desire to please a guest of Catherine's stature. Normally we would need to call the room to get Mr. Thorne's verbal confirmation. She began, her tone apologetic. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Anya, I've just driven 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil the entire thing. Surely we can keep this our little secret? She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both authentic and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Anja's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program a key for you." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Catherine was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. Keycard in hand, they walked away from the desk. "Villa 7 is at the far end of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy. The most privacy to do what Catherine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum." The walk to the villa was the longest of Catherine's life. They followed a winding stone path that meandered through wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of the crashing waves became a relentless roar. Each step was a drumbeat towards a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they were there. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque next to a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. "Kath, are you ready?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft. Catherine looked at the door, then out at the grey, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in its own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit theirs. That image gave her the final surge of strength she needed. "I am," she said. She turned to her sister. "Wait here. I have to do this alone." Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Catherine's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Catherine took a deep breath, held the keycard to the electronic lock, and waited for the small green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa's entryway led into a spacious living area, impeccably decorated in shades of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne sat in a silver bucket on a low table, 2 flutes next to it. One was empty, the other half full, a faint lipstick smear on its rim. A man's jacket, Marcus's, was thrown carelessly over a chair, and from the bedroom just beyond, a partially open door, she could hear voices. A man's low laugh, Marcus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laugh in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she crept across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy post-coital intimacy. The king-sized bed was a tangle of white sheets. Marcus was propped up against the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting next to him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short, black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag, Catherine realized with a sickening lurch. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Marcus's chest with her finger. "You're sure no one will find out?" the woman's voice said. It was a voice Catherine vaguely recognized. "Your wife, she's not the suspicious type." Catherine Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Catherine's heart into a million pieces. "She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in San Francisco saving the world. She's a good woman, but a little naive. It's one of her charms." He was about to say more, but he glanced up. perhaps sensing a change in the light or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Catherine's. Time seemed to stop. The color drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then morphed into shocked recognition. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She knew this woman. It was Sloane Davenport, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This wasn't some random, meaningless affair. This was a liaison with a direct professional competitor. Sloane Davenport stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Catherine who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, calm, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It seems you're in the middle of some very intense solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Marcus flinched, as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a ruin. And Catherine was standing in the rubble, the undisputed, terrifying victor of this first brutal battle. The silence that followed Catherine's words was thick and suffocating. Sloane Davenport, recovering her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter around herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Marcus remained frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The cocksure master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Catherine," he finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? You should be in New York. The baby is fine." Catherine cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze drift disdainfully over Sloane, then back to Marcus. "I see the San Francisco Tech Summit was relocated, and that the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Marcus, or just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Sloane's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Sloane to the spot. "You stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it through to its conclusion." Catherine took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She looked around the suite at the champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that, or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Marcus finally found his legs, scrambling out of the bed and grabbing for his trousers. "Cat, please. Let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk." "This isn't what it looks like." Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It isn't what it looks like, Marcus. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that sentence is? I am standing in a hotel room that you booked under your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm, half naked in a bed that you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is for how long Sloane, seeing an opportunity to sow chaos, spoke up. For about 6 months, she said coolly, looking directly at Catherine. "If you're going to have the details, you might as well have them all." It was a cruel, calculated blow designed to shatter Catherine's composure. But Catherine didn't even flinch. She didn't grant Sloane a single glance. Her focus remained entirely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Catherine repeated softly, nodding to herself. "So this started just after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Marcus. You deserve an award for it." She turned her movement fluid and graceful and walked back towards the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a vacuum of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. Beatrice was waiting by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Catherine's expression, a mask of cold, terrifying calm, she knew. "Let's go," Catherine said, her voice flat. They walked back down the winding path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes pulling away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The adrenaline wore off, and the crushing weight of the betrayal slammed into her. She didn't cry out. The sob was a silent, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice wrapped her arms around her, offering what little comfort she could. "He's dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He's nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We will burn him to the ground." Catherine's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet," she said, her voice raspy. "First, I need to understand everything. This wasn't just a cheap affair, Bea. The woman was Sloane Davenport." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Marcus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What the hell is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Catherine said. "But I'm going to find out." They drove back to the city in near silence. When she arrived at the empty penthouse, it felt alien, contaminated. She instructed Frank to take her to her father's residence on the Upper East Side. She couldn't bear to be in the home she had shared with Marcus. Just as she was walking into the grand old-world lobby of her father's building, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Cat, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It is not what you think. Sloane is not my mistress. It's business. I am using her. Call me. It's vital." Catherine stared at the message, her heart pounding. "I am using her." It was a desperate, self-serving excuse, a classic narcissist's gambit, reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, albeit ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, to the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Sloane's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. What if in some twisted way he was telling a sliver of the truth? The affair being with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "She's been feeding me inside information on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap, but I was the one setting it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Kat. I can explain." This was the twist. the sudden nauseating turn. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but a deeply unethical, potentially illegal act of corporate espionage. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for the affair. He was trying to rebrand it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband was not just a cheat. He was a fool playing a dangerous game, or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just been irrevocably blurred. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts. And Marcus, in his desperation, had just handed her a new and powerful weapon, the knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to ensure his complete and utter destruction. Alistair Vance's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Catherine shared with Marcus. It was a fortress of old money, filled with dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of leather and aged paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Catherine, flanked by a grim-faced Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it, like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him the text messages from Marcus, he was silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But a dangerous one. To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy, it's a level of moral bankruptcy that is frankly impressive." "He thinks it will work," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method. He's appealing to my avarice." "He is appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected gently. "He judges you by his own debased standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce attorney, Catherine. He has confessed in writing to corporate espionage. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, should it be handled incorrectly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Let's just release this to the board of his company." "Let's expose him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We do not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate on the assumption that Marcus is lying, that this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his skin. But we also operate on the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, the Vance residence became a war room. Alistair pulled in his top legal counsel and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kobe, who specialized in discreet, high-stakes corporate intelligence. Catherine was not a passive participant. The shock had transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist, her mind honed by a lifetime of observing her father proving to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Kobe with every detail she could remember about Marcus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the new secretive patterns of his work. She gave him the login details to their shared cloud storage family accounts, anything that might hold a clue. Marcus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence, Catherine told the team, her voice steady. His real weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That's the vulnerability we will exploit. While Kobe began his digital deep dive, Catherine made a call. She dialed Gregory Shaw, Marcus's partner, and the COO of Thorn Capital. Gregory was the cautious, steady hand to Marcus's daring, often reckless genius. He was a numbers man, a risk analyst who had on more than one occasion privately expressed his concerns to Catherine about Marcus's aggressive strategies. Gregory. "It's Catherine Thorn," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a significant undisclosed liability to the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Meanwhile, Kobe hit pay dirt. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Catherine had forgotten existed, he found Marcus's digital treasure trove. It was a series of encrypted files. But Marcus, in his arrogance, had used a password related to a personal milestone. Kobe's team easily cross-referenced the stock ticker of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Marcus's notes on the Sterling Nash takeover, and it confirmed his text messages. He was using Sloan. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had supposedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board's divisions, their largest institutional shareholders' pressure points. Marcus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Catherine saw it as a signed confession. But as Kobe dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the intel Sloan had supposedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings, and he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Catherine into the study. "There is a problem," he said, his Israeli accent precise. "The information from the woman Sloan is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, just enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, the ones about shareholder positions and their debt covenants, they are subtly wrong. They are not mistakes. They are traps." A hush fell over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Sloan has given him," Kobe continued, pointing to his screen, "is designed to encourage Thorn Capital to launch its takeover bid at a specific price point, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our real analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws that is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the takeover. The blowback would leave Thorn Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. The second twist. The real twist. So she wasn't the honey trap, Catherine breathed. He was. She was playing him from the very beginning. Sloan Davenport wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Marcus carefully crafted misinformation, leading him and his company towards a cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. She wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. She was gutting him from the inside out, using his own arrogance as her weapon. Alistair Vance allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant. Utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He handed you the gun to shoot him, and you've just discovered it's a cannon." Catherine now held all the cards. She had proof of Marcus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making a trap set by the very woman he thought he was controlling. She could not only destroy her husband personally, but could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet Gregory Shaw, she was no longer just Catherine Thorne, the wronged wife. She was Catherine Vance, the inheritor of her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Marcus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous place in Tribeca, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. Gregory Shaw was already there, nursing an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Catherine's call had clearly unsettled him. "Catherine," he said, rising as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, Gregory," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down immediately. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Marcus." Gregory's expression tightened. "I don't follow. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal?" "I'll admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections," Catherine said, finally taking a seat, "are based on a fantasy. A fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Sloane Davenport." The name landed on the table between them with the force of a physical object. Gregory visibly paled. Sloane Davenport. From Sterling Nash. That's impossible. It's professional suicide. For Marcus, yes. Catherine agreed. For her, it's the coup of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. She didn't speak with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single damning piece of evidence on her phone, a time-stamped photo she had instructed Kobe to retrieve from the Seagate security footage, showing Marcus and Sloane entering the elevator together. Then she moved to the business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Sloane was leading Marcus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She didn't show him Marcus's confessional notes. That was her trump card to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data. Kobe had compiled the analysis that proved Sloane's information was a lie. Gregory listened, his initial shock turning to dawning horror, and then to cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Thorne Capital alongside Marcus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn that Marcus had exposed them all, not just through recklessness, but through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control fire, Gregory said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip. Yes, Catherine said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the takeover is on Friday. We have 2 days. "What do you want?" Gregory asked, his eyes locking on hers. He was seeing her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player. A formidable one. "I want what you want, Gregory. To protect the firm. To excise the cancer. I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Marcus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be met with applause. He will be met with a unified front." "And you?" Gregory asked. "What is your price?" "My price," Catherine said. Her voice dropping is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be quiet, swift, and uncontested. He will walk away with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on Wall Street. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Friday. We'll be ready." The next 2 days were a blur of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvers. Alistair Vance worked his magic behind the scenes, his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. Gregory Shaw, armed with Catherine's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water, Marcus's blood. On Friday morning, Marcus Thorne walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Thorne Capitol building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest victory of his career. He had tried calling Catherine dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was angry, hysterical, but would eventually come around once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox methods had secured for their family. He smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. "Good morning, everyone. A historic day." No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. "Before we begin," Marcus Gregory said, his voice dangerously calm, "we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies." Marcus's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "My source is ironclad. Is your source Sloane Davenport?" Gregory asked flatly. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the boardroom doors opened. Catherine walked in. She was flanked by her father and 2 lawyers. She was composed, powerful, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future, a future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. "Catherine," he choked out. "What is this?" "This, Marcus," she said. Her voice, ringing with clarity in the silent room, is called due diligence. Something you abandoned 6 months ago. One of her lawyers slid a folder down the table to him. It contained the photo from the hotel, the analysis of Sloane's flawed data, and on top printouts of his own text messages to Catherine. His own words condemning him. "I am using her." He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, out-thought, and utterly destroyed. "The board has held an emergency session," Gregory announced into the void. "We have voted unanimously. We are tabling the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." Marcus looked from the board members to Alistair Vance, whose expression was one of cool satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on his wife. Her face held no pity, no lingering affection. It held only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Sloane Davenport's scheme had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been uncovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything, all because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who carried his child. Catherine stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She didn't need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she didn't look back. She was walking towards her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She had become the embodiment of its power. Her child would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged the queen of the board. In the end, it wasn't the affair that brought down Marcus Thorne's empire. It was his hubris. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed. They infect everything they touch. Catherine's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She didn't just survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own story and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Catherine's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good tale of poetic justice, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger and more compelling than fiction. Thank you for listening.